You're listening to the Good News Podcast with Jamie Holtum, brought to you by NBUC.
Welcome, everyone, to the Good News Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have Tim Day with us. Tim is a very faithful, beautiful leader. I think you're going to enjoy everything Tim has to say. He talks about writing a book. That's a big project, and I love how he breaks down how that happened. He was the lead minister at the Meeting House. He'll share a bit about his history there, but even more so what he's currently doing, a movement called City Movement, bringing leaders together in cities across the country to join forces and for a common cause, and a beautiful app called Engage that'll help us all grow as followers of Jesus. Get ready. We're going to dive in. Glad you've joined us today. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Good News Podcast. So glad you could join us today. I'm telling you, you are in for a treat once again. We call it good news because we believe God is the giver of good news. And this guest today, Tim Day, he exemplifies that from my perspective, from my observation. He lives it out, and he's just a beautiful man. And so glad, Tim, to have you on today for the Good News Podcast.
Thanks so much, Jamie.
We're going to get into some of your past and some of your present and some of your future. And just there's good news all over it. But maybe to start today, just a little introduction. Some people who are listening will know you very well, and others may not know you at all. And so just a little bit about yourself, if we could start there today.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. It's great to be here. And yeah, I fully agree. I love the purpose of this podcast. And I like when you say like there's, and I have to say I've been so fortunate in terms of the life that I had. I grew up in a little town in Ontario, Shirkston, Ontario, on Shirkston Road where the Shirks live. And, one of those like little Ontario, villages, but grew up in an amazing family. And after doing my undergrad, I did undergrad in behavioral sciences focused on family systems, and then did my master's divinity, did youth work for a while, then planted a church out in Eastern Ontario, and then took on some leadership with a church called the Meeting House, where some people may know me from that, where I was there for 14 years. We'll talk a bit about what I'm doing now. Married to Liz, and we have 3 great kids, Nathan, Rachel, and Josh. Nathan is working for a HBO show right now, assisting the executive producer. My daughter, Rachel's at Sheridan, doing illustration, kind of in the illustration animation kind of world. And my youngest is wrapping up high school. We have a little dog named Coco. I love basketball, although Raptors are not doing very well this year.
No, it's a rebuilding.
No, they're not doing so well. And like distance running and writing, wrote a book called God Enter Stage Left, which is like a creative retelling of the biblical narrative. So that's a little quick snapshot of me.
No, man, it's awesome. There's about 10 things that I'd love to drill down into. Hey, to maybe the book, because I think, when that book came out, I remember seeing that and certainly read it within the year that you put it out there. And I just loved the overview of the biblical story that it gave. And especially in a way that, sometimes there can be so many barriers to faith, and understandably so when people, sometimes what people hear, sometimes what people think, so totally, anyway, I just love that as a resource. So since you mentioned it, maybe just a little bit more on where did that come from, that book? Because it continues to be a great resource, friends. Would highly encourage you to pick it up.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, I had a number of things, just like a lot of people with the biblical story, you kind of grow up, you hear bits and pieces here, you jump in and out of it, you get stories. It's hard to piece together. So really when I started, in my master's, I started to read through the Bible as a narrative, like through it and there's a book called The Narrated Bible that a guy named Elgard Smith laid it out as a narrative and put everything kind of in some context. So it's a library. The Bible's a library, but he laid it out as a narrative. And I started going through it and combing through it, and then did a lot of my studies. And every time I'd find something that bothered me, I'd slow down and research it, do more research. And when I got to a certain point of doing this, I'm like, do you know what? My kids were little at the time. And this is going to betray my nerdiness, I guess. I'm like, I'm going to write a commentary for my kids on the entire Bible. And just everything that I've learned on all this study. By this point, I've been studying it for, maybe 20 years, maybe 18 years. And so I started to write it as took me years to write it, about 800 page commentary on it. And at that time, I also started translating the New Testament for them, kind of slowing myself down verse by verse and kind of doing the same thing when I ran into problems, look at it real intensely. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty serious nerdiness. Nobody paid me to do that. It's just for them as a gift. Okay. But when I got to the end of this, then you realize, hey, they're not going to read 800 pages like one swoop. So I started to write a summary. And really the book lifted up out of all that research. And if I was going to say for somebody who's just like, kind of what's the big idea of the book, is one of the things that people struggle with if you just jump in and out of the Bible or you pick certain things is the way that the library works is the first big part that we call the Old Testament is, from a teaching point of view, generally a negative pedagogy, which means it's telling you what doesn't work primarily. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of salt and peppers in, these exceptions that are pointing to a better way that's coming. Okay. So by the end of the narrative, it's an admission. This way of living, which is a religious outside in, control my environment. If I just had the perfect environment, I'd finally be the good person that I know I want to be. Mm. But at the end of it, they realize, no, God has to change me from the inside out. I have to change my heart first. Then you can actually put me even in a very bad environment. But if I've been transformed by the love of God in a deep, profound way, even in that bad environment, then I'm willing to pay the price to become an agent for good, mm-hmm. rather than wanting the perfect environment and then always battling with my heart. So it's the problem then is people read the Old Testament, they try to make it as like part 1 to part 2, as if it's the same story and the same. And, so anyways, once you understand that, start to look through the lens of it, you start to see, oh, wait a minute, there's things that I can apply, because sometimes in my life, I tend to gravitate towards that other story. Mm-hmm. If I just had the perfect environment, if I had the perfect work, if I had the perfect coworkers, perfect whatever, or even just good, like not so troublesome, mm-hmm. I wouldn't have any problems. I'd be happy, But then I have to remind myself, no, that's actually not the issue. My issue is my heart. God wants to change me inside and then I can be truly content and peaceful and mm-hmm. a part of bringing good to the world, because the love of God is moving me. Hence the Good News podcast, Jamie.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
A little plug.
Hey, I'm thinking about that over and over again as you're talking, Tim, and just because that's exactly why we call this a Good News podcast. And you never know what people are going to hear. We have people who are watching and listening to this who aren't necessarily in a church pew on a Sunday morning. And that's totally cool, because God's way beyond a church pew, if you know what I mean. And so
absolutely.
People, and just to know that God enters in, loves us, redeems this world, brings healing and hope. So God enters stage left, friends. Check it out. Tim, I'm curious. You mentioned about the kids being young. We're going to talk about your role at the Meeting House, and it was a big role that you played there. How did you write a book and do all this work in the midst of that? Because I think sometimes people have ideas where they want to start a podcast. They want to write a book. They want to get a blog going. And in today's world, the good news is, anyone can, but there's something that can hold us back sometimes, our own mental ability as far as believing in ourselves, or even I just don't have the time. And you could have offered probably those and more reasons not to do it, and yet you did. So just love to hear the practicalities of how you overcame that to put the book together.
That's an excellent question. And for, the person listening to the podcast right now who says, there's something in me that I feel like I need to get out, but there's something stopping me. Okay. I feel like that's kind of what's behind it. God is giving you something's what's stopping me. And you've named a number of things, and it's good. It's good to kind of do a little bit of an inventory. If you're listening, you think that could be me. Do a little bit of an inventory of what's going on. You mentioned one, which is time. And I picked up something that time management is one piece, but energy management is more important. Mm. In other words, that you might have time, but you might be too tired. There's a lot of people who get to the end of the day, they're just flat too tired. Will, when they study it from a neurological, psychological point of view, is a limited resource. In other words, if you use your time and energy to, let's say, diet or try to break a new thing, you don't have as much energy to apply your willpower to something else. So a lot of times when people are stuck with a creative project, they're kind of out of will energy. They're out of energy in their lives. Mm-hmm. And so some of what I found was I had to be creative. I had to do two things. One is I had to create. The best time to do creative work is first thing in the morning, when you're fresh and your brain is reset from sleeping. But I had to make it an enjoyable experience for myself. Like if it's drudgery and I hate it, then obviously what do? I don't want to do it. But I did a combination of early morning writing and retreats where I actually look forward to. I'd book a nice hotel all by myself. It sounds weird. I'm a bit of an introvert, but I'd plan good meals, nice breakfasts, and I would go away and completely shut myself out. And I'd look forward to it. I'd come and I'd let myself unwind, and then I'd start to create. Yeah. But then I bring some of that back in. One other thing I would say about projects is don't try to do it all at once. Yeah. Break it down into little steps, bite-sized steps. And, everything is easier when it's chunked in smaller steps. So it's like, don't write a whole book. How about just write the list of chapters that you're going to write? And then the next one is like, what are the 5 points that you might put in each chapter? 4 or 5 points, and just start building them out. And then when you get enough kind of sketched out, then just write a quick first draft of the first book. Give it a shot. Get one out. It's always easier to edit something once it's written. Yeah. So a couple little tips. So any little projects that you can do that way. And then finally get some people who believe in you and encourage you. Write or create for someone. Don't create for everyone. That's my final point. Nice. I wrote for my children. I didn't write for everybody. Now it finally got turned into a book. It's been 40,000 copies, and it's been translated into like 4 languages, which is awesome. Yeah. But I didn't write it for all those people. I wrote it for my kids. Yeah. So there you go. Couple quick
awesome thoughts. Oh, I love it. I love the wisdom. I love your motivation. I love the creativity of just booking a hotel, creating some nice space to do this, give yourself a treat in some way so that you can enjoy this. Like God wants us to have fun, to enjoy our life. And we can be disciplined and do these really important projects in a way that allows that to happen. I don't know if you've read the book Deep Work by Cal Newport, but because really that's what you're doing. You're taking some time to do deep work, getting out of the day-to-day grind, going off to create some space for that. It's a great resource. But he tells us a story in the book about a guy, I forget the guy's name, but the guy actually, he was a writer, he's trying to write books. He actually did this, I don't know if he did it more than once, but he booked a flight to Japan, and he never actually went out of the airport. He just wanted some time alone to write. And
that's hilarious.
So the way you did it was a lot less expensive than a flight to Japan. So
that's hilarious. I actually love to work on planes, so I can relate. But it's a lot cheaper just to go to a nice hotel, spend your money in a nice hotel, book a nice breakfast, dinner.
Exactly. Oh, thanks, Tim. Just want to slide into some of your experiences and role working at the Meeting House in ministry there as the senior leader. And it, for those, maybe a little bit about the Meeting House, because people may not know, but definitely a unique expression of God's church in Canada, and just love certainly we've learned so much from the Meeting House, and glad for the work that God has enabled them to do. But you had an inside, you were part of that. So just love to hear a bit about that part of your life.
Yeah, it started with the Meeting House got started as a church plant from a young couple, Craig and Laura Sider, and Laura's my sister. So it goes right back to like opening Sunday, 1986, when they planted this little church. At that time, it was called Uprooks Community Church, and it was just like, a young couple in their 20s going out trying to get something started. Now, it just kind of bubbled along there until Bruxy, who's the teaching pastor still there now, came in the late 90s, and it started to grow. And then come 2000, they were looking for, to add some more leadership. And we had known each other from seminary. And so I wrapped up what I was doing at church planted and led some city movement stuff out in Belleville, and came back, joined with him. And so we were at that time in a high school, and they just had a vision. Some really interesting things happened about trying to kind of like spin off. They didn't have enough space for everybody at the time. And so to kind of like, hey, create a video overflow kind of idea in Hamilton. A bunch of people are driving in. It's temporary until we could find a building, because we'd maxed out the school. And what basically was like a temporary solution turned into a long-term strategy. Sometimes Brooks would say, God was kind of dragging us into our own future. And sometimes we need that, like, God has a better plan for us than we do, but we're sometimes a little slow on the draw. So anyways, we basically in the first year did almost everything wrong you could do. Okay. We just made every possible mistake, and it felt like a train wreck, but it grew, it doubled in size. And then the group in the Toronto area is like, hey, why do they get, a location and we still have to drive all this distance? Can't we do it? So that was basically, I think of like leadership genius. It's like, make a lot of mistakes, try to figure out what God's doing, and then join God when you see it, and then try to clean up, whatever mess you made. So anyways, in time, God added team members, and we started this process of it's actually a network of house churches that share gathering points in different kind of regions. They call them parishes now, actually. They're kind of adopting that old language, but a community space where they create space for home churches and Christians to gather. And it's spread out over 14 years to, from Ottawa to London, Hamilton, I think 16, 17 locations. And it just kept kind of growing organically. Real heart for peace, reconciliation, and relationships, living kind of an irreligious life. Not focused on a relationship and friendship with God, not so much on the rules, rituals, regulations, routines. And so it was a messy, wild ride of growing from a high school to all these locations. And it was quite the experience.
That's so awesome. Tim, you mentioned just, the first year made lots of mistakes. I think sometimes we don't talk enough about our mistakes, and there's so much to learn. So love to hear even some practical examples on what kind of mistakes did you guys make in that first year, but then also what went with that spirit of clearly not feeling like you failed necessarily, but just laughing at yourself or what it might be, learning from it, and seeing it as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to actually see God at work beyond yourselves, is what I'm hearing, which is so good no matter who we are or what we do,
Yeah, well, no, I'd rather talk about mistakes than successes, because like mistakes, you usually slow down and try to figure out what went wrong. Yeah. When you're successful, you just kind of carry on. You're not always sure why you were successful. Like you just might have like been luck, kind of like fortunate, or God overcame all your failures and something happened. So, it seems like mistakes, you can learn more. One series of mistakes that we made very early on, and sometimes we would repeat it later, was we underappreciated the need to combine passion and spirit and vision with very simplistic but sound organization. The systems that organize our lives make community possible. Like if you go to a party and you just have that master hospitality person who just thinks of every detail, you come in, you don't think about every detail. You just think about the people, and you just relax, and you're having a blast. The party that doesn't go so well is the person who hasn't thought of anything, and you're wandering around trying to find, like, does anybody have a fork here? Because I can't eat my salad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the first mistakes we made was we were way too, if I could say, relational, and kind of working off people's, kind of good nature, and hey, let's all kind of just throw this together. And when we started to add more administrative gifts, more organizational gifts, we were still super relational, but we had less stress in the system. And but that took finding those gifts. So if I was going to come back and say, look at whatever you're trying to do, and say, is there any gift missing that would really make this a great, well-organized, impassioned experience? Sometimes people have all the organizational gifts, but they don't have that passionate, people charisma. And then other kind of people charisma, talking to people, don't have the organizational gifts. And you kind of have to marry those two. So that was one big mistake. The other big mistake we made was we got pressed into a corner one time with our partnership. We worked with movie theaters, and they told us we had to get out early. And there was this thing about we were doing worship music at the time, and sometimes people were coming that were, not from the church. We're kind of like, I'm going to come a bit late, because I'm not really into the singing stuff. I just want to hear the message and go home, which is totally fair. That's fine. If you're kind of new to that, you're not into that. Yeah. So we did this whole creative process because we had to restructure everything. By this point, I think we had 12 or 13 sites, and we had to do this in the sites. We had to kind of do teaching, have a little break, have our music together, and then have another teaching session. And the first one had the kids associated with the first teaching. Then we had music with parents and kids together, and then another round of teaching, which all on the whiteboard or on, look great, right? We all mapped it out. We went through a massive, brought all of our trailers in, repacked them. We had to restructure everything, tell everybody, hey, we had to change our service times, had to accommodate the theaters, all the rest of it, because they were like rolling out new movie times. We do this whole massive project. It was a nightmare. Okay. People didn't like it. We had talked about it. They just straight up didn't like it. And people just started leaving. Like, I think we lost 500 people in like 3 months, something like that. Right. Yeah. And then they didn't change their movie schedule. So then we're like, oh my gosh, can you imagine? So then we go back, it's like, nothing's changed. And they said, oh, well, we're not rolling out the new movies, whatever. Then we're like, oh my goodness. So we had to go back. And this is like, I don't know, 5,000 people, 12, 13 locations. We had to bring everything back, repack everything, go through this massive change. It basically killed a year of our whole community.
Wow.
To go back and kind of put it all back together. And we had lost 500 people, started to grow again. As new people came in, they kind of felt better. We didn't gain back the people who left. They were kind of like, hey, I'm out of here. And that was it.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. But there's one of those mistakes. It's like, you have a big team, you have lots of smart people around it. You're doing a lot of interaction, you're processing, you do everything. And you still look back and say, wow.
Yeah.
I wish we wouldn't have done that.
So what would be the lesson on that second one that you just named?
Well, I honestly say this, that's the type of thing you wish you could, avoid. Yeah. But I will say, I think there's two things that have stuck with me on that one.
Yeah.
One is, and this is maybe kind of instructive to just how it's like an intuitive part of our life. And that is when we're in the best version of ourselves, connecting with God, we kind of want to put it all together. We don't like to break things into parts. And I think when there's just some interruption to that moment of time where it's like, I'm connecting with God and I'm thinking, people didn't like that. There's something that just felt right by breaking the flow, not being in the flow together. And I think there's a little bit of a principle there around, and this is maybe, if you could say, kind of some people are like more like check box, put things in boxes. God's about kind of connecting the boxes, about connecting us together. So that was one thing I think we underappreciated, that more heartfelt, emotional, complete experience that touches my heart, my mind, every part of me in community. I think we missed that. I think we became practical.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. Second thing, lesson I learned is sometimes doesn't matter how smart your team is and how smart you are, you can't know the future.
Yeah.
You do the best you can, you make a mistake, or you look back and it becomes a mistake. And you just have to have the humility when we did the stand up, apologize for the impacts that it had. It was not what your intention was, but sometimes good intentions still have bad impacts.
Yeah.
Like you have to just realize in leadership, you do the best you can, but you have to be humble and transparent.
Yeah. Cool. So to name, hey, when it didn't work out, let's not pretend it's working out. Just name it. We're sorry. Here's where
readjust.
We're
That's right. Yeah. In leadership, don't think of yourself as having the perfect track, like the perfect run. I was the leader who did, 25 years of the perfect run. It's like, that's not realistic whatsoever.
Yeah.
Kind of playing in, how many bad situations do you think are reasonable to have every 10 years? Just like factor that in. Say, are you good at guessing how many bad situations you're going to end up in? Is it going to happen? You might as well plan
exactly.
ahead.
Yeah. Anticipate it. It's going to happen.
Anticipate it. Right?
Yeah. Exactly. That's all. Every once in a while I lose my wallet, and so I always panic. Like I start going crazy inside and freaking out. And every time it happens, I think I should just like expect that this is going to happen, and then maybe get everything duplicated. So when it happens,
you don't stress out.
Yeah, of course, I've never quite gone to that extreme, but that's my thought after it happens.
Yeah, well, at some point in time, you might do that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
but it's that kind of thing of like, if you plan ahead, then when it happens, then you're kind of like, yeah, this is that's a part of the equation. Yeah, some people have this too, like in small ways, like staff resigned. Oh no, I didn't see that coming. I've decided early on, it's like, no, God moves people around. People have different things. Like, don't try to control life that much.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece of that particular lesson. And right now during COVID, important for us to, because things are changing. Every organization is transitioning. People are making changes in their life. They're realizing that they can work from home forever and they can live in different, everything's changing. And I agree. That's been a big lesson for me this year, Tim, just to let go of control a little bit, do our part, and just trust that God is at work, and it will all work out in the end. God's got lots of resources, lots of people, and God's never done working. Friends, the Meeting House is a great church. Check it out. Just some great resourcing and leadership happening from there. And Tim, just want to slide into the next piece of your life. You made a major shift. And in some ways, leaving it's one thing to leave a ministry that's not working, as that happens for people. You left obviously a great church that it continues to be vital, and that's awesome. But you were led to this ministry called City Movement. So love to hear a bit on that calling and wrestling and making a significant shift in your life like you did, and then a little bit of what City Movement's all about, because really want to get into that as well today.
Yeah, just on the life move and leadership, like if you're changing, that's another one of those things about the perfect track record. A lot of times people plan what I would call climbing the leadership mountain, but they don't plan what happens on the backside of that mountain. So they kind of get to the top, then it's like, how long can I hang on? Right. Yeah. And then there's younger leaders coming along like, hey, buddy, time to move on. You know what I mean? Now that's not always the case, but it has that's not uncommon that you get to that place. Like you said, it's like, if you're successful, you never want to leave that seat. Mm-hmm. But it was just one of those things I had processed with God, is like, I don't want to actually look through the paradigm of success. I want to look at my life through the paradigm of like obedience to God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And to not evaluate things externally, or like external measures. I want to look at like, what is God saying to me? Am I doing this? And it became apparent. And I just felt this intuitively. I actually told another leader that I'm friends with, Carrie Newhoff, I said, I very much doubt I'll be the senior pastor of the Meeting House when I'm 55. I just don't think it'll happen. I don't know when I'll transition, but I know God will have something else for me. And so I need to be open to that. And this was back in my 40s. Mm-hmm. And it was actually towards the end of my 40s then, as we got to that point where there's enough, it's too long of a story, but there's just all sorts of signs and conversations, things happening that I knew things were moving. Some of it was in the changes in society more broadly, and conversations are part of it. Other just odd events. And through that process, I started praying and thinking and realized that, and it was hard. It was not easy. There's some really hard times. Like I battled internally with it, because it was the thing that I was ultimately called to do was so out of logical sequence. What the Lord called me to do in the first year, and as a small team, was just to listen to leaders across Canada, United States, and in the UK. And it's deep listening. And here's the odd thing that came from it. Out of that time, then we did a millennial think tank with millennial leaders. And it was the whole thing was around this massive change the church is going through in response to the culture going through a massive shift, the invention of the iPhone and this new digitally connected world. It's different than just the internet. We are connected person to person globally like never before in history, right? And it just has ramifications for everybody, right? Disruption. Then you throw a global pandemic on top of it. In that listening process, God was able to reform and shape a vision of how we could work with millennial leaders in a new paradigm, how I could use my leadership to support kind of this new paradigm that we're working on in Canada, which is, I think is safe to say, because I've talked to like the largest tech company, Christian-owned tech company in the US, and a lot of leaders internationally. I think what we're prototyping in Canada is the first of its kind. It's a new way to think about how the church can work together, going hyper small, hyper connected, but also integrating all churches and ministries into one kind of ecosystem of how we might know what each other's doing, and then where it makes sense to partner, and to also demonstrate, actually be able to communicate to civic leaders and business leaders, corporate leaders, what the role and contribution of the church is. So it's a very exciting project, but that move out of leading, like basically what I used to tell people is, after 14 years of leading the same organization through all of its growth and changes, you could open up a calendar and point to any day of the year. Say, Tim, what are you doing on this day? And I would say, okay, February 14, what am I doing? I'm preparing our operational planning meeting for our March meeting. I've got this. I've got a staff meeting on this day. Structure, everything. I know, like barring some catastrophe, I know what my to-do list is.
Yeah.
To that being lifted out of all of that security, the Lord just saying, okay, we're going to go into a white space here because I've got to speak some new creative things into existence, and it's going to take a while to absorb this.
Wow.
Which ended up being like a really cool experience. I'm still trying to figure it out. Like it's a lot of times in obedience to God, God gives you enough to know you're supposed to do something, but doesn't give you much more than that. Like he's like, seems extremely comfortable with just trust me. You know what I mean? Like he just like, don't worry about it. Trust me, which I wish at my age I would do better at sometimes. Relax, because I emotionally stress about it. Right. Anyways, that's what happened. So that was what pried us out, was just basically God orchestrating things to say, need to let it go. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges of my life, was to trust God with that step.
Because I mean, as I said, it was a huge step for you. You just named one, from a structured to an unstructured, from a very clear what I'm doing and what we're doing to it's a creative vision that still has to come together. And I think as people listen today, we all have these changes in our life. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. But I totally agree with you, Tim. Like rarely do we know the full picture. Like it just life. We're not God. Life doesn't work that way. And now there's so much complexity to this world. Things are changing even more so because of COVID. And I think it's Psalm 119. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And we've really taken that verse to heart at NBUC, recognizing that God really does often make it clear what that next step is. And you have that kind of conviction, even when you don't know, which is scary, what's after that. But it's funny when you take it and somehow trust enough to take that step, it is amazing how then the next one does become clear. And then the next one, it's like God is lighting the path one step at a time. And I'm so grateful for your trust in that as you've made this shift. I love the vision that God has given you and your team around bringing cities together across our country and beyond to work together. I think we all know, especially as leaders, and we're all leaders, we all lead in different ways, to have this vision and idea of what it could be like, but then the execution of it can sometimes bring some challenges. And I'm really curious, Tim, because sometimes for whatever reason, it can be a challenge to bring different people together for lots of reasons, really, I guess. What are some of the challenges that you found as you've tried to work at this? But then also, what are some of the joys and blessings and gifts and opportunities that have been there as well already as you get this going?
Yeah, I think anytime you talk about bringing people together, that could be a family, right? That could be,
You should see our family try to decide on a movie to watch together.
I know, exactly. That could be just like trying to figure out Netflix, right?
Yeah.
People are different. They have different perspectives. And then, especially if they live separate from each other and they're not used to hanging out, you bring them together and they have different language, different ideas. And the church sadly is really not much different. We have a lot that unites us, but more often than not, we pay attention to things that we look at. We have different traditions, different histories, different practices. And so we feel uncomfortable around people. So we like to be with our own kind, kind of people who look like us, talk like us, enjoy the same things and stuff. It's a way of me loving myself, right? Yeah. I just hang out with people who are all like me, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to be other-centered and to love others that are different. So that challenge is no different in this type of work. I would say and real practically speaking, something I'll be able to throw this in when you're working with people is, when working with people who are different, have a different perspective, James says, be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to get angry, or slow to react. I like to change that get angry to be slow to react. And when you're working with somebody else, to assign a positive motive, even if they look like they're in a bad mood, or they're doing something, that saying words that you don't like or whatever, assign a positive motive that deep down inside, they are trying to work something out. And you can listen to them and just try to say, what can I learn from them? What's a perspective I need to slow down and absorb before I try to, say I'm right and they're wrong. That is a huge process. And if you're in the type of work, you do this, Jamie, I do this work. You probably have tons of examples of this. You have to model that all the time. You can't just say, I do that occasionally. That has to be a way of life of how you approach people. Then you can be, when Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers and the Beatitudes, they'll be called the children of God, or the sons of God, in plural, could also be, they'll be like me, a peacemaker, a bridge builder, a healer, right? And I think that is some of the greatest work that is needed in the planet right now. Not just, it's always been needed, but when the world gets closer connected, and we're all connected, we're all online, and we're all getting kind of like, triggered, maybe upset all the time, social media, posting, reacting. We need people who are, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to react, and become peacemakers. I just think that's not a church thing or a city thing. That's a global thing. That's like all the time. So the positive things is, I think we're in the midst of a type of change we're just going to get carried down this river. And so I think the church learning how to work together, I would say, is not like a goal or an aspiration. It's an unavoidable future. I think we're going to end up having to work our stuff out. And the reason is because the world is so connected, and younger generations coming up, it's just how they think. It's how they approach the world. They might divide over issues and have to work them out, but by and large, they want to figure out how to make it work. And I think before we stayed separate because we didn't need to see each other. Now we need each other. And so I get to be kind of on the early edges of seeing this happen. New points of reconciliation, new points of divides being crossed, people starting to work together. Sometimes it's in pain. One other thing I'll say is kids learn and change because they know they don't know stuff, and they're little and they're trying to figure it out. Adults tend to change when they have pain. It's like they avoid it until they're in such pain, then they go to the doctor. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I hate to say it, but that's kind of how we are.
Yeah.
But we're in enough collective pain that people are willing to start to make change. At least some. I realize some are still entrenched. But anyways, I'm excited about it. I'm seeing things I've never seen before in my life in terms of the way the coming together. If you look at the number of people partnering, it's just wild what's happening. Divides crossing between, here, like he's talking like a more mainline Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, evangelicals, charismatics, all finding this place to be together. There's a lot of stuff we still have to work out, and probably some stuff we have to shake off, to be quite honest, right?
Yeah.
But it's there's something emerging that's really cool that I hope as a result of it, we'll just be in a better, stronger position in 10 years from now.
Yeah.
To really be servants.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you say you're seeing things come together already? What are some things that you're seeing, maybe even an example of that, Tim, where even if it is through pain, because I totally agree that as we work through pain brings change, and God's at work in all of that. Hey, that's the good news of the cross. God came and entered in so fully. But how are you seeing it happen at this point? Even just a practical example around that.
Yeah. So kind of so if you go onto Waybase, you'll see we've mapped everything so we can talk to everybody, kind of see who they are, how big they are, mapped all their data and all the rest of it. So now we're able to connect. So here's a great example of it. So within, let's say, large ministries like serving our cities, Salvation Army, the Catholics have a number of ministries like Society St. Vincent de Paul, Knights of Columbus, right? They have these different ministries that fundraise and do stuff overseas, Caritas. But as we started to map this all out, city missions, they're all kind of disconnected, right? And then, so then we just start talking and just starting to build relationship. And then all of a sudden you find it's like, oh, actually the people are willing to talk. They just never really had a chance to talk. So now what's emerging is like more and more conversations where they're all kind of migrating together and like, hey, maybe we need to build, in this case, a national association for domestic community development that brings everybody to the table, gets organized. And, as we take those kind of steps, that's at a macro level. Down at a local level, I was just talking with leaders in Edmonton, and they had two ministerials, more evangelical or a mainline. Right now, there's a go-between, somebody who's kind of bridging it. They're kind of merging, trying to figure out, okay, there's still a lot of things they're debating. They're starting to hang out more. So when I talk with them, they're like, hey, yeah, maybe we should all like use this time to like process more. Same, just had a meeting the same day yesterday in Quebec City. Just some incredible dialogue going on between people who don't normally hang out and don't need to work together now because of the pandemic and because it's kind of a new day. It's like, yeah, let's get around the table together and talk. Say what can we only do together?
Yeah.
Right. That for this kind of boulder to be lifted, or this bridge to be, this thing to be bridged, what requires all of us to build this thing? And that kind of spirit, I'm just seeing it both at a national level, right down to city levels. It's just kind of happening. And, and I think we're going to see more of it. Now, will there still be division? Yes, because humans are still humans.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have our lesser nature that takes over. But those are some examples of.
Tim, I'm getting excited just hearing about that, and I mean, what I'm hearing is instead of competing with each other to help churches collaborate and complement each other, even, you were talking earlier about the meeting house, and one of the big lessons was bringing our different gifts together. Well, we can do that as churches. So friends, check out waybase.com, waybase.com. Is that right?
That's right. Waybase.com.
Check out waybase.com, because you may in your church decide, hey, there's a place that we can both be blessed by what someone else is doing, but we also maybe can offer this. I mean, an example as I'm hearing this, Tim, is we're doing Alpha right now online, and many churches are doing Alpha. We're doing Alpha Marriage online, right. And we've had just because we're blessed with some connections with other churches in the city and beyond, we've had a number of pastors and their partners joining us from other churches, and just have wanted to say, like, if you want to join us, there's no cost; it's all free. You don't need to. God has blessed us with a team that's excited to do this. So if you want to use this to bless your community, come on along. Like, these are the kinds of things that we can do together, right?
Absolutely.
And it feels so right. It feels like God would be smiling at this, and because I just think that division, and I agree, we can't necessarily ever take it fully away. But division isn't what God wants to do. No. Like, that's not on God's heart. God's wants to bring us together. And God's got to be smiling at this. And just as you're talking to Tim, I can see the way God has been at work in all that you've done in the past to bring you and your team that you're building, obviously, to a place where you are uniquely enabled to do this. This is exciting. This is so exciting. There's a piece that you're also doing that's even more, even fresher, just getting built. And this is the app around Engage. Right. And friends, we are in a time where technology, I know, we've got no choice. Like, we've just got to enter in. I love hearing the stories of, like, my parents entering into Zoom calls for the first time, because it's the only way they're going to get to see their family. And it's amazing. Like, we've all stretched. Yeah. And so technology can be a way that we can grow in faith and community and connection in greater ways than ever before. And in some ways, COVID has forced us to leverage that, which has been a gift. And so I love this Engage app. Please, please, please share a bit about it and how you see it blessing churches, communities, individuals as followers of Jesus.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Depending on the technology, writing scrolls was the technology of the day, and the church went crazy on it. They wrote, and that now we actually have such a great copy of all the early church writings, was because they used the technology of their day to really get the message out. In the same way, the printing press, right? And printing Bibles and printing books and tracts out. The church jumped on these things. Well, the new technology that's connecting us globally is smartphones. And so app, being mobile, they call it, is kind of the way people connect and organize their lives. And so this new app, and I was talking with a bunch of leaders yesterday about it, trying to describe it in a simple way, because a lot of people say, well, is it like social media? And it's not. It's almost like upside down to social media. So social media app is about how many followers I have, and I post maybe my picture or my thought of the day, how many people like it, and maybe comment on it publicly. It's very public, and it's very like, do I have a big following? I can measure how many people like me. Okay. And then I can also like take somebody down if they say the wrong thing, and we can all come on, boo, cancel people, all this stuff, right? It's very public. It's very like you have to manicure a presence and see how well you do. Are you high up there or mid post or kind of low? Well, that's one way of looking at it, right? One way of looking at your life, of how well do you fit in and how popular are you and how successful you are. This app is actually about almost the opposite. It's about how am I applying Jesus' teaching to my life? And do I have a very small group of people that know me well that I can be honest with? So it's really not about how I appear, but what I do and how I process it with people that I trust. And it's kind of creating a private world, not to live a private life, but to create a high trust environment where I can be honest, where I don't have to be worried about being attacked, but I can be transparent with people who I trust the most, and kind of listen to my messages from my church, and they can challenge me to take actions in my day, and I can actually organize myself to take action. I can build either a small accountability group or join my church's group or like an alpha marriage course and have a little group discussion, but it's just focused on people I trust that I can be real and honest with. Then the fourth component, kind of like learn, act, discuss with those I trust. The final part is reflect. It's a bit of a journaling, has a journaling component where I reflect at my inner life, my home life, and my social life, and say, where do I see God at work? And as I'm living this way, how do I keep track of that? So it's very much about your own spiritual growth and connecting you to the people you trust and the people who are nurturing your relationship with God, and kind of organizing that. And, one of the things that's interesting, like the Beatitudes is like the upside down. I spoke recently at your church on this. It's kind of like the upside down way of looking at life, and inside out, upside down. And the app is really that kind of upside down to how a lot of people do their online presence. Right? It's kind of like the inversion. And I was saying to some people, in this, it's like, there was a time when people were so into alcohol back, in the late 1800s, people would go into bars to try to get them out. And even the saying, fell off the wagon, right? You probably know where that came from, right? Yeah. Your listeners can look that up if they want to. Trying to get people out of the bars. And I think in some ways, we as Christians sometimes need to get out of certain spaces and kind of pull back a little bit and just look and say, is that helping me? Like, am I being influenced by it, or is it influencing me? And we just need to evaluate. Doesn't mean we totally disconnect, right? I'm not a prohibitionist, okay? But if there's too much control in my life, if it's controlling me too much, then God wants me to pull back, because ultimately God doesn't want me to be controlled. Right? God wants me to be, actually empowered by His love and presence working through me to be free. So anyways, I just throw that out, that social media for some people, doesn't have to be the only thing that you do. And we have a vision for creating this app to serve the broader church this way. So anyways, thanks for
No. Like, I'd like to just take one more run at the Engage app, because I think the world needs this. I mean, again, good news, Jesus is countercultural. And sometimes you're looking at the world and thinking, it's just not quite right. Well, it isn't. And right. I think nothing wrong with social media, like totally, I'm not hearing, exactly, Tim, I'm not hearing you saying that. It's a great way to get the message out. But how do we get the message in to us?
That's right.
Right. And so to engage, like this app, guys, it's really about helping people engage with God and with others in a deeper way. And I am excited to try it out. Our team had a presentation from Tim this week on it. Everyone's really excited to try it out. Tim, when you were sharing it with us, one of the things that I loved was you talked about having some conversations within your family, like with your kids, which hey, maybe we can bring it back another day, because I'd love to talk with you as a Christian leader who's living out your faith, how we share that within our own family, man. Like, that's a huge one. this app is one of the ways that you're doing this with your adult kids. And it's not just about you sharing. I know that like they're sharing and you're learning and growing together, but just love to hear a bit about how you're having some fun with that and growing together again in that smaller, this isn't for everybody. This is within your own family, your own home a little bit as well.
Well, yeah, if you're on the parenting side of thing with your kids, one of the things that I prioritize growing up right from a young age is to go for walks and talk with my kids and be honest about not every struggle in my life, but be honest about my doubts on things I'm processing and how I walk things out. And it created this space where they could just kind of have their own doubts and process things and look at life from different points of view. And I saw myself as a parent, not so much trying to, well, first of all, not just to have them as like a prop in my life, right? That they're just there and I somehow like, give them the bare minimum to keep them going, but saw them as my greatest legacy to the planet in and I wanted them to be who God created them to be, not who I wanted them to be. So part of that was the discovery process and to be honest about my journey. So they encountered life. They would know what life is like as an adult or as at different stages of life, that they wouldn't have this thing of like, do you have to have it all together or whatever? Just like, look at this is a work in progress. So that has led us to the point now where like with my kids and stuff like this, as they're adults, we have unbelievable conversations. I learn from them and I hope they learn still from me. And it's just, it's one of the most beautiful things in my life. So I'm glad to come back and talk more about that. But the Engage app is, to be honest with you, a lot of what I learned from my kids and how they operate helped me in my part. Now I'm mostly millennials building this, okay, and technologists building this, but I get to throw in my thoughts, right? But it's actually me listening to my kids and putting it in there for them. That it's an app that I am receiving the benefit of the creative ways they look at the world and how practical they are about how they want to make a difference. And it's their new tools, and I'm learning how to do it just like grandmas and grandpas learning how to use Zoom, learning how to get organized to be practical and how I serve other people. And so anyways, yeah, thanks for let me tell a little bit about my kids who I love.
Oh, hey, we'll let's do that, man. Let's have you back again, Tim. That'll be a fun discussion, and maybe we could bring one of your kids too, not to put pressure on them. Totally, but that would be fun, man. And
that would be amazing.
I know our kids would probably I could talk. I would have. I'm sure we're having some of those same conversations in our house these days. And I guess what I would want to just put an exclamation mark, and I hear you saying it too, is the growing together. And I'm not just saying this. I think I grow more from them than I could even imagine them growing from me. And it's such a cool ride. And well, guys, want to thank you for joining us today. Just would like to close with a prayer. So much to give thanks for this conversation. So let me close with a prayer, Tim, and then we'll be on our way. Yeah, for sure. Loving and gracious God, thank you so much for the energy and for your spirit's leading of this conversation. I've felt you at work as we've talked together today at so many levels. Thank you for humility, for grace, for you being present in and through it all, for new ways of experiencing you and connecting with you and with others. Bless Tim on this journey that he and his team is on to create movements in cities across the country and maybe even globally that could bring leaders together in new and refreshing ways, to engage with an app that can help us grow in our faith and our connection with others. All of this is needed now more than ever before. And so we entrust it all to you and thank you for the opportunity that you continue to give to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks again, Tim, for joining us today. Always
my privilege.
Hey, thanks so much. And everyone, thanks for joining us on the Good News Podcast today. Next week, we'll have a great conversation, talk about good news once again with Coach Stan Wilson, who has been coaching in the Brampton Royals organization for years, not just developing baseball players and winning national championships, but even more importantly, developing people. I think you'll really enjoy Stan in the conversation. Hope you can join us. Thanks again, Tim. God bless you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Good News Podcast with Jamie Holtum. If you liked what you heard today, please share it with a friend who may benefit from today's conversation. And if you want to hear more, be sure to subscribe to this show and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. Thanks again. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and we'll see you next time.